The first thing I learned about surviving on your own was that pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. It sat heavy in my chest every single morning when I lifted that white plastic bucket, the kind you'd normally use to mop floors, filled it with water from the gas station 2 blocks over, and arranged my flowers inside it with the kind of careful precision that a person develops when they know that every unsold stem is a meal that won't happen. Carnations, sunflowers when I could get them cheap from the wholesale lot, roses when I was feeling optimistic, which happened less and less as the weeks went on. My name is Jerry Prince. I was 23 years old. I was 6 weeks pregnant, and I was completely, devastatingly broke. The corner I'd claimed sat directly across from a glass and steel tower that climbed 40 stories into the sky. It was the kind of building that had a lobby with marble floors and a security desk staffed by 2 men in blazers. The kind of building where people in expensive shoes walked in and out all day long without ever really looking at the street, without ever really looking at me, which suited me fine. Or at least, that's what I told myself every morning while I arranged my flowers and tried to make the bouquets look as lush as possible, despite the fact that I bought the blooms at the discount section of the wholesale market. The ones that were a day or two from past their prime, the ones that other vendors passed over, the ones that still had beauty left in them if you knew how to look. I knew how to look. That was one thing I still had. I'd been standing on that corner for 3 weeks when things started to go wrong in a way that felt specifically personal. The way the universe occasionally decides to make its contempt for you very, very clear. It started to rain. Not a polite drizzle either. It was the kind of rain that comes in sideways, the kind that makes umbrellas useless and soaks through the back of your collar, even when you're standing under the awning of the dry cleaners next door. My flowers trembled in the bucket. The cellophane I used to wrap the bouquets began to bead and slip. A woman in a trench coat hurried past, glanced at me, glanced at my flowers, and kept walking with the particular expression of someone who has decided very firmly not to feel guilty. I was standing there in the rain, my hand pressed flat against my lower back where the ache had been living for 2 days now, watching my carnations droop, when the revolving door of the tower across the street swung open and a man walked out. He wasn't remarkable at first glance. Medium height, broad through the shoulders, in a way that his dark overcoat did nothing to hide. Dark hair gone slightly unruly at the ends, like he'd forgotten to get it cut. When he reached into his inner pocket for his phone, were large, the kind of hands that look like they know how to carry things. He looked up from his phone. He looked directly at me. I looked away first, which was not something I was proud of, but there was something in the directness of his gaze that caught me off guard, the way a sudden light catches you when your eyes have adjusted to the dark. When I looked back, he was still watching me. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped off the curb, waited for a gap in the traffic, and crossed the street toward me. My stomach tightened with the specific anxiety of a person who has learned to be wary of strangers approaching. But he stopped at a respectful distance, close enough to look at the flowers in the bucket, and his expression wasn't the pitying look I'd grown accustomed to. It was something more like genuine consideration. "The sunflowers," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that sounded like it was accustomed to rooms listening. "How much for a bunch?" 12, I told him, or 2 bunches for 20. He looked at the bucket, looked at me, looked back at the bucket. "I'll take 4 bunches. I blinked. 4 bunches was $48, which was more than I'd made in the last 2 days combined. My hands were steadier than I felt as I pulled 4 generous bunches of sunflowers and wrapped them in cellophane, tying them with the yellow ribbon I kept in my jacket pocket. He paid me with 2 20s and 1 10, which he'd folded together like he'd prepared them in advance. And when I tried to give him back the $2 change, he held up one hand briefly and said he didn't need it. I almost said something sharp about charity. I swallowed it. "Thank you," I said instead. He nodded, tucking the flowers under one arm, without any self-consciousness about it, the way some men are awkward carrying flowers like they've been told it makes them look soft. He didn't seem to carry that particular insecurity. He was halfway back across the street when he turned around. "Are you here every day?" "Most days," I said. He nodded again, like that confirmed something, and then the revolving door took him back. I stood in the rain for another hour. I sold one more bunch of carnations to a woman who bargained me down to $8. But for the first time in 3 weeks, I walked back to my apartment with enough in my pocket to buy groceries and pay the gas bill, and the ache in my lower back felt just slightly less like a sentence. His name was Ricky Ray. I didn't learn that for another week. In the meantime, He became simply the man from the building, which was how I cataloged him in my head, carefully, at a distance, with the deliberate detachment of someone who has recently learned that attachment leads to places you cannot afford to go. He bought flowers from me 4 more times that week, not always sunflowers. On Tuesday, he bought 2 bouquets of white carnations, and on Thursday, he came out at noon and bought a single rose, just one, and studied it for a moment in his palm, before tucking it into his breast pocket with a faint expression I couldn't read. On Friday, he bought a mixed bouquet that I put together that morning in a hopeful mood, yellow and orange, and the deep burgundy of the roses that had come in fresh for once. He always paid generously. He always took his change only when I insisted. He always crossed the street to come to me rather than waiting for me to call out the way the other vendors did. I told myself none of this meant anything. I was 6 weeks pregnant with a child whose other parent had looked me in the eyes 3 months ago and told me they were leaving, that this wasn't what they'd signed up for, that I'd known when we got together that they weren't looking for anything permanent, and perhaps I should have been more careful. I was 2 months behind on my rent. I owned 3 changes of clothes, a sleeping bag rated for temperatures 20 degrees colder than my apartment got, and a bucket I found behind a restaurant that I'd scrubbed until it was clean enough to hold flowers. Romance was not something I had space for. But on the Friday evening when he came out and bought the mixed bouquet, as he was turning to go, he stopped and said, "You look cold." "I'm fine," I said, which was what you say when you're not fine, but you've decided that being not fine is your own problem. He looked at me for a long moment with that unhurried gaze. Then he said, "My name is Ricky Ray. I work on the 22nd floor." He paused. "In case you were wondering." "Jerry Prince," I said, because it would have been strange not to. "Jerry Prince," he repeated, like he was storing it somewhere. "Do you eat dinner, Jerry Prince?" My heart did something complicated. "Everyone eats dinner," I said carefully. "I mean tonight. There's a diner on 4th that stays open late. I thought—" He stopped, reconsidered. "I'm asking if you'd like to have dinner with me. I understand if the answer is no." It should have been no. Every practical, self-protective part of me was already composing a polite but firm refusal. I was pregnant. I was broke. I was standing on a street corner selling discount flowers. This man bought flowers from me 4 times a week and paid generously, and I had no idea what he wanted from me, except that whatever it was, I couldn't afford the cost of it. "Okay," I said. I didn't know why I said it. I know now, but I didn't then. The diner was warm in the way that only old diners are warm, with the kind of heat that comes from decades of cooking and the windows fogging up in the cold and vinyl booth seats worn smooth by years of customers. There were photographs on the walls that nobody had dusted in a while. The menus were laminated and faintly sticky. I loved it immediately, which surprised me. We sat across from each other in a booth near the window, and I was suddenly, acutely aware that I was wearing my second-best jacket, which was not very good, and that my hair was doing something I hadn't checked in a mirror. Ricky Ray seemed unbothered by all of this. He looked at the menu with the same calm consideration he looked at everything with. "Do you have any dietary restrictions?" he asked. "No," I said, which was true in the technical sense, and not necessarily representative of the fact that I hadn't had a proper meal in 4 days and was trying not to look at the prices in a way that made it obvious I was calculating. He ordered when the server came, with the ease of someone who has always known that ordering food was a simple and uncomplicated act. He ordered enough for 2 people, without making any particular ceremony of it. When the food arrived, it was plentiful and good, the kind of food that tastes like something when you've been eating crackers and instant noodles. The kind that made my eyes sting briefly in a way I was glad the lighting in the diner was too dim to expose. We talked. I don't mean we made small talk, though we did some of that. He asked me how long I'd been selling flowers, and I told him almost a month. And something in his face registered the precision of almost a month without pressing it. He asked if I'd done it before, and I told him no, that I'd been doing something else before, and he didn't ask what. He told me he'd worked in the building across from my corner for 4 years. Finance, not a banker, he clarified, but adjacent to banking in a way that apparently made a difference to people who understood the distinction. He mentioned it without any of the self-importance that I might have expected, the way some people mention successful careers like a credential they're waiting for you to admire. "Why do you buy so many flowers?" I asked. Because I'd been wondering. He considered this for a moment, the way he seemed to consider most things, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was deciding how to say it accurately. "I like them," he said finally. "And I think people who sell things on street corners in the cold, deserve to sell things. I looked at him across the table. That's a specific philosophy. I have specific philosophies. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile yet, but it was something adjacent to one. I had a friend years ago who had a table at a flea market. Handmade things. She was very good at what she made, and people would walk past and look and not buy things, and she'd pack up at the end of the day, sometimes having barely covered her costs. It bothered me. Did you buy everything she made? Not everything, but I bought enough that she started breaking even. He shrugged, like this was a normal thing. Eventually she got a proper space. She's doing well now. Something loosened in my chest, very slightly, against my will. After dinner, we walked. He didn't suggest it, I did, almost without thinking, because I wasn't ready to go back to my apartment yet, and the night air was cold but dry, and the city looked better at night when you couldn't see as much of it clearly. He walked beside me without taking up too much space, which was something I noticed because some people, especially large men, have a way of physically crowding without meaning to, a gravitational pull that narrows the sidewalk. At the corner where we had to part ways, he turned to me and said, "I'd like to do this again, if you're willing." I studied his face in the streetlight. It was an honest face. Not perfect. There were lines around his eyes and a scar along his jaw that was old enough to have faded to silver. But honest in the way that some faces simply are. The way you can tell that what you're seeing is the actual thing. "I should tell you something," I said. "All right." The cold air felt very clear and very still. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds, which felt longer. His expression didn't change in the ways I braced for. No alarm, no recoil, no rapid recalculation. He simply absorbed the information and let it settle. "Okay," he said quietly. I'm not telling you so that you'll do anything. I'm telling you because you said you wanted to see me again, and I thought you should know. I appreciate that." He paused. "Does knowing that change whether you'd like to do this again?" I blinked. That's not how that question is supposed to go. Maybe not, but it's the relevant question. I thought about it standing there on the corner in the cold. I thought about the warmth of the diner, and the way he'd ordered food like it was natural, and the way he'd walked beside me without crowding me. I thought about the price of self-protection, which I had been paying for months, and what it had and hadn't bought me. "I'll see you Monday," I said. "I'll be on the corner." "Then I'll come out for flowers," he said. He waited until I turned and walked half a block, before I heard his footsteps moving in the other direction. I don't know why that mattered, but it did. The weeks that followed were strange and quiet and full of a kind of accumulating tenderness that I kept trying to put a practical name to, so that I wouldn't have to acknowledge what it actually was. Ricky came out for flowers every day. Sometimes at lunch, sometimes in the early afternoon, sometimes in the late evening when I was packing up and the street was going blue with dusk. He always bought something, even on the days the selection was sparse, and the best I had was a bucket of carnations past their peak. On those days he'd pick out the healthiest bunch and carry them into the building with the same unhurried dignity. We had dinner twice a week, always at the diner on 4th, which became ours in the quiet way that neutral places sometimes become yours. The server there, whose name badge said Miriam, and who had the sharp-eyed warmth of someone who has served a lot of people and developed strong opinions about them, began bringing my tea without being asked after the 3rd visit. I was 8 weeks pregnant, then 9, then 10. The nausea was manageable most mornings, but not all of them. And there were days when I stood on the corner with a plastic bag in my jacket pocket just in case, and tried not to let my face do anything alarming when a wave of it passed through me. On those days I drank ginger tea from a thermos and breathed through my nose and sold flowers with a slightly more fixed expression than usual. Ricky noticed on a Thursday. He came out at 11 in the morning, which was earlier than usual, and I was in the middle of a bad patch, breathing carefully through my mouth and trying to look like I was simply examining a bouquet of carnations with great professional interest. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine. Jerry." His voice was quiet and not unkind, and there was no question in it, which was somehow more effective than if there had been. There was a low cement ledge along the front of the dry cleaners that I sometimes sat on during slow periods. I sat on it now. He stood slightly in front of me in a way that blocked the wind and maybe also blocked me from the street, which was a thing I chose not to examine too closely. After a minute, the wave passed. I breathed out. "Sorry," I started. "Don't be." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small bottle of ginger ale that was still faintly cold from wherever it had been. "I stopped at the pharmacy on my way in this morning. I thought you might need it." I looked at the bottle. I looked at him. Something in my chest did the complicated thing it had been doing more and more often in his presence, the thing I kept smoothing down and refusing to name. You can't take care of me, I said. I mean, you shouldn't feel like you have to. I don't feel like I have to. He sat down on the ledge beside me, which was something I hadn't expected, given that his coat probably cost more than my rent. I feel like I want to. Those are different things. Ricky, I'm not asking you to accept anything you don't want to accept, he said. I'm giving you a ginger ale. They're 99 cents. I took the ginger ale. I drank it slowly. The cold fizz settled something in my stomach and something else entirely in my chest, and I sat there on the ledge of the dry cleaners while Ricky Ray sat beside me with his hands on his knees and didn't say anything, which turned out to be exactly right. We sat there for 20 minutes. I sold 2 bouquets without getting up. Customers came to me, perhaps moved by some combination of proximity and sympathy. Ricky handed them their change when I was occupied with wrapping and didn't make anything of it. When I felt well enough to stand, I stood, and he stood with me. Dinner tonight? He asked. It's a Tuesday. I know what day it is. I considered this. Okay. He went back into the building. I went back to my flowers. Miriam at the diner that night brought me a cup of broth before anything else, without explanation, and when I looked up, she just said that she'd heard somewhere that it helped, and then moved on to another table. I thought about how it is that kindness sometimes arrives in clusters, after a dry spell, the way rain does. He told me about his life in pieces, the way careful people do. He'd grown up without money, which surprised me until it didn't. There was something in the way he interacted with the world, a lack of waste, a precise appreciation for things of quality that made more sense in the context of someone who had learned to value things carefully before he could afford them. He'd worked through school, had put himself through everything, with no safety net he was willing to rely on. You could have asked your family, I said once. I could have. His jaw was set in a way that didn't invite pursuit of that line of thought. I preferred not to. He'd built his career methodically, the way people who have no margin for error build things. He owned the apartment where he lived, which was 3 blocks from his office, and he owned it outright, which he mentioned not with pride, but with the tone of someone confirming a logistical fact. He'd been in a long relationship that had ended badly. He didn't tell me many details, and I didn't press for them, but there was something in the way he spoke of it, carefully, with the precision of someone who has processed something many times and arrived at a place of clarity rather than bitterness. That told me it had cost him. Do you get lonely? I asked, one evening when the diner was quiet and Miriam was doing crossword puzzles at the counter and the windows were streaked with rain. He thought about this with his characteristic unhurried honesty. Yes, he said. I'm better at it than I used to be. But yes. I got lonely before I was even alone, I told him. That's a specific kind of terrible. He looked at me across the table. Tell me. So I told him. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. The relationship that had felt like home and then started feeling like a house whose walls were slowly moving inward. The morning I'd learned I was pregnant, and the specific quality of the silence on the other side of the room when I said the words out loud. The weeks after, when I tried to find work and found that the timing was wrong and the money I'd saved ran out faster than any responsible calculation should have allowed. And then the flowers, a practical desperation, a last resort resource, and the corner and the cold. Ricky listened. He didn't offer solutions or consolations or the particular species of advice that is actually just the speaker reassuring themselves. He listened with the same quality of attention he gave to everything, like what I was saying mattered and deserved the full space of being heard. When I finished, he said, "You're doing remarkably well. I'm selling flowers on a street corner. You're sustaining yourself in a pregnancy in difficult circumstances with no support structure, maintaining your dignity and showing up every day." He paused. I think that's remarkable. I pressed my lips together. You have a very strange way of framing things. Accurate framing, he said, is not the same as strange framing. I laughed. It surprised both of us, I think. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from a place that hasn't been visited in a while. And it sat strangely in my chest afterward, like something that had been dislodged. Ricky's expression, across the table, was very still and very warm. I was 12 weeks along when I went to my first prenatal appointment. I'd been putting it off, which was not medically advisable and which I was aware of, but the cost of it without insurance was a number I couldn't look at directly, and the free clinic 2 bus rides away had a 3-week wait and a telephone hold system that dropped my call every time. I'd been taking prenatal vitamins I bought at the pharmacy, the store brand, which were fine, The doctor on the internet said they were fine. And eating as carefully as I could, and trying not to think about all the things I didn't know. Ricky found out I hadn't been to a doctor yet on a Wednesday evening when he asked how the pregnancy was going, and I answered with a vague optimism that he saw through with the precision of a man who pays close attention to things. "When's your next appointment?" he asked. I looked at my tea. "I'm working on scheduling one." The silence was brief. "Jerry." I know, I'm handling it." I kept my eyes on the table. "The free clinic has a wait, and the private ones are expensive, and I have it under control. Let me help." I looked up then because the way he said it wasn't the way people usually say things like that. With discomfort, or pity, or the slight air of someone who wants credit for offering. He said it the way he said most things, simply, directly, without ornamentation. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because I've known you for 5 weeks, and I'm not in a position to owe anyone anything right now." He was quiet for a moment. Then, what if it wasn't a debt? What if it was just... He stopped, and there was something careful in the pause, something that felt like the approach to territory he'd been circling for a while. What if it was just me doing something for someone I care about? The words landed and sat there between us. I felt my heart doing the complicated thing again, more urgently than usual. "That's a significant statement," I said carefully. "I know." He met my eyes across the table. "I'm aware that the timing is complicated. I'm aware that you have a great deal on your mind, and that whatever this is, a slight gesture between us, is not uncomplicated. But I think you know what I feel, and I think I'd rather say it clearly than let you wonder." I did know. I had known for weeks, in the way you know things you're not ready to acknowledge. I'd cataloged it in the careful, peripheral way of someone who has trained themselves to look at bright things indirectly. "I'm pregnant," I said, "with someone else's child. I'm broke. I sell flowers on your street corner. I know all of that. It's not an uncomplicated package, Ricky." "No," he agreed. "Neither am I." The corner of his mouth moved. "I've been told I'm difficult." "By who?" "Several people whose opinions I stopped valuing some time ago." Despite myself, I felt my mouth curve. He watched it happen with that still, warm expression. "Let me take you to the doctor," he said. "Not as a favor, not as a debt, as someone who wants to know that you're all right." I looked at him for a long time. The diner was warm. The windows were steaming at the edges. Miriam was humming something to herself at the counter. "Okay," I said finally, "but I'm paying you back. If that makes you comfortable." It does. Then, all right. I paid him back 3 weeks later when I had a good run of sales and felt, briefly, like a person with options. I handed him the amount exactly in an envelope, with the specific dignity of a person who does not take things they cannot account for. He took it without comment and without making anything of it, and I respected him enormously for that. The appointment confirmed everything was fine. Heartbeat strong. Development on track. The doctor told me I was doing well for someone in my circumstances, which I received as the complicated compliment it was. It was 13 weeks when I first saw his apartment. Not the way you might expect. There was nothing precipitous about it. I'd been caught in a sudden storm at the end of my workday, the kind that arrives without any of the reasonable warning storms are supposed to give. And he'd come out of the building to find me soaked and trying to protect my remaining flowers under my jacket. And he'd said simply, "Come upstairs," in a tone that left no room for the usual argument. His apartment was 3 blocks away and on the 18th floor, and it looked like him. Clean-lined and thoughtful, with good lighting and things chosen for quality rather than display. There were books stacked in a way that suggested they were actually read. There was a blue ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter that was the most beautiful object I'd seen in months. He lent me dry clothes, a sweater that came to my mid-thigh, and sweatpants with a drawstring I had to pull to their limit, and made tea while I changed in his bathroom, which smelled like clean soap and the particular calm of a space that belongs to a person who takes care of things. I came out of the bathroom in his clothes and stood in his kitchen doorway, and he turned from the stove and looked at me for a moment. "You look," he started, and then stopped. "Don't," I said, not unkindly. "I was going to say warm," he said. "Oh, I felt something in my face do something I couldn't entirely control. Thank you." We had tea at his kitchen table, and he showed me photographs from a trip he'd taken years ago to somewhere with mountains and clear water. And I told him about a summer I'd spent when I was 17 working at a garden center, and how that was where I'd learned what I knew about flowers, which turned out to be useful in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Was it a good summer?" he asked. "It was the best summer I remember," I said. "I smelled like soil for 3 months, and I thought that was the best thing in the world. He smiled then, not the partial thing from the corner of his mouth, but a real smile, full and unhurried, and it rearranged something in the room. By the time the rain stopped, it was late, and he called me a car home without asking. And when I protested, he pointed out that it was 11 o'clock, and I was pregnant, and the argument ended there. In the car, watching the wet city lights blur past the window, I let myself think the thought I'd been keeping at a careful distance. I was falling in love with him. It was not convenient, it was not sensible, it was the most impractical thing I had undertaken in a life that was currently full of impractical things, and yet it was also, in some fundamental way, the most inevitable. Like a flower pushing up through pavement, not because it was a good idea, but because that was simply what it did. He kissed me for the first time on a Thursday. I know the day because it was the day I sold out of everything before noon, which had never happened before, and I was feeling the particular lightness of unexpected success when he came out at noon and found me with an empty bucket and a full pocket. "You sold everything?" He looked genuinely pleased, which was one of the things about him. He could be genuinely pleased about things that were happening to other people. Every last stem. I was grinning, which was also something that had been happening more since he'd become a regular part of my days. "I might take the afternoon off. Then have lunch with me. A proper lunch, not the diner." He paused. "There's a place I like. Quiet. Good food." We went. The place was quiet, and the food was good as promised, with the kind of menu that doesn't need to show off, because everything on it is simply well made. We sat at a table near the window, and outside the city went about its business, and inside I felt, for the first time in a long time, something that resembled ease. We talked about small things and large ones. He told me that he'd been thinking about leaving his current firm to start something smaller. I told him I'd been thinking about what I'd do when the pregnancy advanced to a point where standing on a street corner 8 hours a day wasn't feasible anymore, which was a thought I'd been circling with a careful kind of terror. "You'll figure it out," he said. That's a lot of faith for someone who watched me nearly pass out from nausea on a cement ledge. "You didn't pass out." He tilted his head slightly. "And yes, I have a lot of faith in you. I've been watching you show up every day in conditions that most people would use as a reason not to show up. I think faith is a reasonable response to that." I looked at him across the table. The afternoon light was doing something warm with the angles of his face, and I was aware, in that particular moment, of the exact nature of what I felt when I looked at him. "Ricky," I said. "Jerry," he replied, and there was something in the way he said my name, quiet and precise, that made it sound different from anyone else saying it. "Are we?" I stopped, started again. "What are we doing?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know, but the silence of someone who is being careful. "I'd like to know you for a long time," he said. He paused again, "I'd like to help, if you'll let me. Not as a transaction. Not because the situation makes me feel charitable. Because you are someone I want in my life, and the circumstances of your life are part of you, and I want all of it, if that's something you can consider." My throat was doing something inconvenient. "That's a very large statement," I managed. "I know. I mean it." We walked back toward his building after lunch, and at the corner where I'd have turned toward my own street, we stopped, and he turned to face me, and his expression was the most open I'd ever seen it. He lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair from my face with the backs of his fingers, very gently, and then his hand curved against my jaw, warm and steady, and he looked at me the way he looked at things he considered carefully. I leaned forward, because sometimes the next step is not complicated. He kissed me softly, briefly, with the restraint of someone who is not taking more than he's been offered. When he pulled back, his thumb traced a small arc along my cheekbone, and his eyes searched mine. "Is that all right?" he asked. "More than all right," I said. His smile, when it came, was quiet and complete, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in longer than I could measure. Nothing in real life resolves cleanly after a first kiss. I want to be honest about that, because the weeks that followed were not entirely simple, and pretending otherwise would be a disservice to what they actually were. The pregnancy continued, which meant the changes in my body continued, which meant I was confronted daily with evidence of a life I hadn't chosen on my own terms, a situation I was navigating with whatever resources I could scrape together. The nausea began to ease around 14 weeks, but was replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that was a different kind of hard, the kind that makes you feel like you're moving through something thicker than air. Standing on the corner became harder. My feet swelled. My lower back went from an ache to a constant companion that required management. I bought a foam pad at a discount store and stood on it, which helped somewhat and drew exactly the kind of looks you'd expect from passers-by. Ricky saw all of this. He didn't look away from it or manage his reaction into something more comfortable. He adjusted. He started bringing me lunch on the days he could get away from his office. Nothing dramatic, just food from nearby places, still warm, handed over in the quiet way he did things. On the days the cold was particularly bitter, he arrived with coffee and the specific wordless concern that had become one of my favorite things about him. And then one evening, I was sitting on his couch. I'd started spending some evenings there, which had happened gradually enough that I hadn't noticed the exact moment it became normal. And he came and sat beside me and said, "I want to talk about something." "That opening is never a relaxing opening," I said. "I know. I'm sorry." He looked at his hands for a moment. "I want you to move in with me." The room was very quiet. "Hear me out." He turned to face me, and he had clearly prepared this in the way he prepared most things, carefully, without leaving loose ends. "Your apartment costs you a significant portion of what you make. You're getting further along in the pregnancy, and the physical demands of your work are increasing. You're going to need support that your current situation doesn't provide. My apartment has a second bedroom that I use as a home office but don't need to. I can work from the living room or rearrange." He paused. "I'm not asking you to be dependent on me. I'm asking you to let me share the load. There's a difference." "I've known you for 3 months," I said, which was the most rational objection I had ready. "I know. This is fast." "It is," he agreed. "I'm also—" He stopped. Something moved across his face that was not quite uncertainty, but was adjacent to it. A rare departure from his characteristic groundedness. "I'm aware that I'm asking something significant. I'm aware that you've had to be very self-reliant, and that what I'm offering might feel like it has strings attached, and I want you to know that it doesn't. If you want to move in and keep separate finances and pay me whatever rent feels equitable, that's fine. If you want to move in and work out something else, that's fine. If you want to say no, that is also—" He exhaled. "That's also fine, even though I hope you won't." I looked at him for a long time. The apartment around us was warm and quiet, and smelled like good things. I thought about my apartment, which was cold in the mornings and drafty at night, and had a radiator that made sounds like it was protesting its own existence. I thought about the walk up 3 flights of stairs that was getting harder on my swollen feet. I thought about the specific loneliness of nights when the fear came in, not about him, not about love, but about whether I was capable of doing what I was about to have to do, whether I was strong enough for it, whether there was enough of me to go around. I thought about what it felt like to sit on his couch in his warm apartment and have that specific, hard-to-name feeling of being somewhere you belong. "Okay," I said. Something in his face went very still. "Okay," I said again, more firmly. "But I pay you rent, a fair amount that we agree on, and I keep my independence. And if it doesn't work—" "If it doesn't work," he said, "you'll have options. I'll make sure of that." "Why?" I asked, because it was a thing I'd been asking in various forms since the beginning. "Why are you so sure about this, about me?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the pause of someone who doesn't have an answer, but the pause of someone finding the most accurate words for something they feel fully. "Because you sell flowers outside a building in the cold," he said finally, "when you have every reason to have given up. Because you fight for yourself with everything you have and still have enough left over to laugh at things. Because when I bring you ginger ale, you look at me like it's extraordinary, even though it's just ginger ale." He paused. "Because the first time I saw you, I crossed the street, and everything since has confirmed that was the right thing to do." My throat was doing the inconvenient thing again, worse this time. "You know," I managed, "you're very persuasive for someone who claims to be difficult." He reached out and took my hand, his large fingers closing around mine with gentle certainty. "Stay," he said quietly. I stayed. I moved in on a Saturday, which took one trip because I did not own very many things. Ricky helped carry what there was without comment or ceremony, which was exactly right. He'd cleared the second bedroom and set it up practically, a proper bed, a dresser, space for whatever I needed to make it mine, which at that point was not a great deal. He'd also, I discovered, stocked the kitchen with the kinds of foods the pregnancy books recommended, which he'd clearly looked up, which made me stand in the kitchen doorway for a moment, doing something embarrassing with my face. "The book said leafy greens and protein," he said from behind me, without turning around from what he was doing, "and ginger tea, which we already knew." "You read pregnancy books?" My voice came out a little unsteady. "I read the relevant sections." He turned then and looked at me with that still, warm expression. Is that strange? No, I said. No, it's not strange. Living with someone is its own kind of learning. There are the small discoveries that he was a genuinely good cook who approached cooking with the same methodical care he brought to everything, that he slept with the windows cracked open, even in cold weather, which I found endearing in a slightly irritating way, that he had a habit of leaving his reading glasses in impossible places and then walking around looking for them with the glasses on his head. There were the larger discoveries, too, the ones that accumulate over weeks of proximity. The way he handled difficulty, which was steadily, without drama, with a quiet problem-solving orientation that was one of the most calming things I'd ever witnessed. The way he navigated disagreements, which happened because we were both people with opinions and points of view, and which he never escalated or shut down, but simply held space for until we both said what we needed to say and found our way to something workable. The way he treated the pregnancy. He treated it like it was real, which might sound like a strange thing to say, but I'd spent months in a state of managed uncertainty, telling myself things were fine, and not letting myself fully inhabit the reality of what was happening in my body. In his apartment, with his matter-of-fact informed attention, it became real in a way that was frightening, and also, somehow, a relief. He came with me to appointments. He sat in the waiting rooms of medical offices without impatience, reading whatever he'd brought without fidgeting, and in the examination rooms he sat in the chair near the door, unless I gestured him closer, which I started doing more and more often. He asked the doctors precise questions that I sometimes didn't know to ask. He wrote things down in a small notebook. At 16 weeks, the doctor showed us the ultrasound image. I was not prepared for what that would feel like. I'd been managing my emotional response to the pregnancy with the careful detachment of someone who wasn't sure they could afford to be fully present to it. And then there was the screen with its grainy black and white image, and the specific shape of a head, of a hand, of a profile that was astonishingly and undeniably a person. I made a sound I hadn't intended to make. Something came loose in my chest. Ricky's hand covered mine on the narrow bed of the examination table, and he didn't say anything. And that was exactly right. And I let myself cry in the dim light of the ultrasound room, in a way I hadn't let myself cry in months. Afterward, in the car, he was quiet until I was ready for words. Okay? He asked. More than okay. I looked out the window at the moving city. Just a lot. Yes, she's real. We'd learned the sex that day, which I'd been ambivalent about wanting to know, and then, when they told us, felt a sudden and complete clarity that we had been right to find out. She's actually real. She's very real. His voice was warm. She waved. I laughed through the residue of tears. She waved, at the camera. Clearly has good instincts. I laughed again, and somewhere in the middle of it the crying finished, and I was left feeling scraped clean and somehow lighter, the way you sometimes feel after a storm passes. I stopped selling flowers at 18 weeks. The decision was mine, which was important to me, and it was arrived at practically. The physical demands had become genuinely prohibitive, and I'd been honest enough with myself by then to admit it. I'd also, over the months, built a small amount of savings, which was not a lot, but was more than I'd had in a long time, and felt like evidence of something. The last day on the corner was a Friday. I set up my bucket as usual and arranged my flowers with the same careful attention, and somewhere around midday, a woman I'd never seen before bought 3 bunches for her office and told me they were the most beautiful flowers she'd ever bought from a street vendor, and I decided to take that as the ending this chapter deserved. I was packing up when Ricky came out of the building. He'd known it was my last day. He stood on his side of the street for a moment, watching me fold my table and lift the empty bucket, and something in his expression made me stop what I was doing. He crossed the street. He said, "That corner won't look right without you." "It'll adjust," I said. He took the bucket from my hands, which he always did when he was nearby at the end of the day, and stood there holding it. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I've been meaning to say it clearly. You did something remarkable." I looked up at him. The late afternoon light was doing the warm thing with his face again, the same thing it had done that first day at lunch that had started something irreversible. "I sold flowers," I said. "You survived," he said. "You showed up. You didn't let circumstances make you smaller than you are." He paused. That's worth saying clearly. Something in me that had been braced for a very long time, braced against the particular cold of managing things alone, finally let go. I stepped into him. His arm came around me with the particular gentleness of a large person who knows their size and doesn't want to crowd, and I put my face against his shoulder. and let myself be held for a moment in the middle of the street I'd been standing on, alone for months. "Thank you," I said into the fabric of his coat. "For what specifically?" "For buying the sunflowers," I said. "The first day, in the rain." He pressed his mouth to the top of my head, briefly, warm. "Best $90 I ever spent," he said. "There is nothing in the universe that prepares you for the experience of birth." I had read things. Ricky had read things. We'd attended a class together, where a cheerful person with laminated diagrams had walked us through what to expect in a way that was practical and useful and bore approximately 30% resemblance to the actual event. She came early by 3 weeks, which was not, the doctors assured me, a cause for alarm. 3 weeks early was within normal range, and she was a healthy size, and everything was as it should be. The labor itself was long, which is a mild word for what it actually was, and at some point in the middle of it, I said some things to Ricky that were not fully representative of my feelings about him. He held my hand through all of it. He had done the reading, which meant he knew when to speak and when not to, and he got it right more often than anyone under those conditions should have been able to. When I squeezed his hand with the particular force of a person making their way through something enormous, he didn't wince or pull back. He stayed. When she arrived, the room was loud in a way that became immediately and completely irrelevant, because the sound she made was the loudest thing in it and the only thing that mattered. They put her on my chest, and the world reorganized itself. She was tiny and red and furious and perfect, and she smelled like something I had no previous reference for, and which turned out to be the most specific and accurate smell in the world. The smell of her, of this person, of this absolute and specific individual who had been arriving for months and was now here, now real, now present in a way that the ultrasound screen had only approximated. I looked at her for a long time. I looked up at Ricky. His eyes were wet, which was the first time I'd seen that, and he made no attempt to manage it or look away. He looked at her and he looked at me, and his expression was the most open thing I'd ever seen on a human face. "Hello," I said to her, quietly, just for her. She turned her head, slightly, in the inexact way of newborns, in the direction of the sound. "There you are," I said. They kept us 2 days, which was standard, and in those 2 days, Ricky did not leave except to go home once for a change of clothes, and he was back within 2 hours. He sat in the chair beside the bed and held her when I needed to rest, and when he held her, he went very still and very focused, the way he went still with things he was considering carefully. On the second day, I watched him holding her while I ate the lunch I'd been ignoring, and something settled in me with a finality that felt like a door closing on a room you don't need to enter anymore. "Hey," I said. He looked up. "I love you," I said. Not as something to be careful with, not at a distance, but directly and clearly the way he said most things, because I had learned from him that directness was a form of respect. I have for a while. I thought you should hear it said clearly. He was quiet for a moment, with our daughter in the crook of his arm. Then he said, "I've been in love with you since the rain." "The first week?" "The first week." He looked at me steadily. I didn't say it because I was waiting to be sure it was what you needed to hear, rather than what I needed to say. That's a very specific distinction. You matter to me, specifically. He paused. Both of you. I felt my throat do the thing. "Come here," I said. He came and sat on the edge of the bed, which was narrow and probably not supposed to hold 2 adults and an infant, and he settled her between us carefully, and I leaned against his shoulder, and we sat there with her asleep between us while the hospital went about its quiet business outside the door. "We should name her," I said. "We've been discussing names for 6 weeks." "We've been not agreeing on names for 6 weeks," I corrected. "That's different." His chest moved under my cheek with something like a laugh. We named her the following morning, after another small negotiation that went easier than the previous 6 weeks of discussion had suggested it would. And the name we chose was simple and good and felt right when I said it to her. She looked, as I said it, as though she was considering whether to accept it. She apparently decided to. 6 months later, I walked past the corner for the first time since I'd stopped selling flowers. I had her in a carrier against my chest, which was where she preferred to be and which I had stopped finding inconvenient approximately 48 hours after her birth, and she was looking at the world with the serious, observational attention she'd been bringing to everything since she'd arrived. She had my mouth and an expression that I was increasingly convinced was Ricky's, even though the genetics of that didn't quite add up. which was either a testament to the power of consistent company or a mystery I was happy to leave unsolved. The corner had a new vendor, a young man with a table of handmade jewelry, silver rings and earrings spread on a cloth. He was doing the thing you do when you're new to street vending, trying to look confident, while also scanning every passerby for the specific type of eye contact that signals someone might stop. I stopped. "These are beautiful," I said, and I meant it. He lit up the way you do when someone says something true about your work. We talked for a few minutes. I bought a pair of earrings I didn't need because his prices were fair and his work was good, and there was something I felt I owed to that corner and to the general principle of people showing up to do hard things. I was walking away when I looked across the street at the glass tower. Ricky was standing at the window on the 22nd floor, or at least I thought it was him. The distance was not inconsiderable, and the reflection on the glass made it hard to be certain. But the figure was the right shape, the right stillness, and as I looked, it raised one hand briefly. I raised mine back. She made a sound against my chest, a small investigating sound, as if she too had noticed something worth attending to. "That's your dad," I told her quietly. "He's the one who bought the sunflowers." She considered this with the appropriate gravity of someone for whom all information was new. I'm 24 now. She is 7 months old and has developed very strong opinions about things, which is either genetic or environmental, and probably both. My life does not look like I imagined it would, which is something I think about sometimes with the specific wonder of a person who has been surprised by the forms that good things take. I work now. I found a part-time position at a plant nursery 3 bus stops from the apartment, which means I spend my working hours among growing things, which it turns out is good for me in ways I didn't know to ask for. The smell of soil in the morning is exactly as good as I remembered from when I was 17. I still make bouquets on weekends because it turns out the practice of it is something I carry in my hands now. And on Sunday mornings, the kitchen table is sometimes covered in flowers until Ricky points out with quiet amusement that we do not have infinite counter space. He started his smaller firm, which is doing well. He still works long days sometimes, but he comes home. And home is a specific and reliable place that I did not always have. We are not married yet, which is a topic that comes up occasionally and is approached with the same careful, earnest directness that he approaches most things. There is no urgency to it from either of us. What we are is clear enough without the formality, and when the formality comes, and I think it will be as an addition to something already built, not as the foundation of it. Last Tuesday he came home with sunflowers. He bought them from a grocery store, which is the kind of place I would have previously turned my nose up at from the perspective of a flower vendor who knows the difference. But the grocery store flowers were fresh cut and yellow and bright, and he set them on the kitchen table in the blue ceramic bowl that is still the most beautiful object I own. And when I came out of the bedroom with her on my hip and saw them, I stopped in the doorway. He was standing in the kitchen, with his back to me, putting water in the kettle, and he hadn't seen me yet. I stood there for a moment watching him, this man who crossed the street in the rain to buy flowers from someone who needed them to be bought. This man who read pregnancy books and wrote things down in a small notebook, and held my hand through a very long night and said "I love you" only when he was sure it was what I needed to hear. She grabbed a fistful of my collar and made a declarative sound. He turned around. "Hey," he said. He crossed the kitchen and kissed me once, on the mouth, and then kissed her forehead, which made her grab at his nose with great enthusiasm, and he laughed the real laugh, the unhurried one, and the apartment was warm and full of the smell of flowers. I thought about a corner in the rain, and a white plastic bucket, and the particular look of someone crossing a street who has decided something. I thought about how home is sometimes a direction you move toward without knowing it, following something that is warmer than where you've been, until one day you find that you've arrived. We have arrived. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story. And if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.